Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sundays at 7. Um, Today is a day that almost didn't happen here. As of last night, I was having some frustrations with my IT and open broadcasting software, and basically I decided not to have a live stream today, but I was going to come on and just announce that and say that we'd carry on next week. But after a night's rest, you wake up, you think, I'm like, all right, let's give it a shot. So hopefully things will go smooth today. Um, because I do have some things I want to share and recap so I can continue on the journey next week with new information. So this morning I'm going to try to share with you a song from Ancient News from our friends in New Thought Unity in Cincinnati, David Kaiser, and let's see if this will work, and hopefully it will. So let's give it a shot, and we'll get started with um, the rest of Sundays at 7 here shortly.
Desperation turned to shouts of celebration, welcoming a wayward loved one. Coming to this world to touch with healing hands, the wound still bleeding, in the heart still longing, needing comfort through the night. I come to see and hear and touch the want, the need, the pain, the aching, till the perfect dawn comes breaking through the darkness, filling us with light. Coming to this world to hold the hand of every other creature, walking till we finally reach the resting place promised from the start. I come into this world to know people who would rather die than let an angry, unkind word fly from their lips to pierce another's heart. I come into this world to sing the sacred chant the earth has sung, since all the stars and moon were hung to guide us ever home. I come into this world to see the gun fall from the shooter's hand, the moment that we understand precious life we're saving is our own. I come into this world to sing the sacred chant the earth has sung, since all the stars and moon were hung to guide us ever home. I come into this world to see the gun fall from the shooter's hand, the moment that we understand precious life we're keeping is our own.
Okay, well, hopefully that came through. If so, I'll find out in a little bit when we're done here. But So I hope everybody had a good week this week. Um, I did quite a bit of listening this week to try to get around the subject that I wanted to talk about. And as I said last week, I wanted us to spend some time in the second of the three worlds today. That world being that no one will be all right. I want to emphasize to you that you know, reiterate once again in the three world campaign that I am leading, that either everyone's going to be all right, or that no one is going to be all right, or that some are going to be all right, that I do not claim to know which is the reality. I have my belief. I believe that everyone's going to be all right. But because I cannot claim to know that, because I do not know the future, I have my reasons, just as those who live in the world and only believe that some will be all right have their reasons. And then there is the third world, and that's the one we're going to talk about today, the world that no one will be all right, the world that we live and that we die, and that's all there is. Now, this week I um, made a couple of posts that I want to just mention in passing here. And if you'll give me just a second here. The first one that I posted this week was on the split brain experiment. And this was actually one that Sam Harris mentioned in his book. I don't know if it was this specific experiment, but he mentioned the experiment of the split brain. And in this video, if you had a chance to see it, it was short. Um, it was basically um, talking about someone that had their brain, which we have two sides to the brain, um, that once that was severed with a surgery, that it affected his their ability. It affects, and I've heard it said in rare cases. So I don't know if it happens in every case. The ability for someone to communicate what they are seeing. And there's the experiment where they have a dot in the middle of the page and they flash something on the right side and something on the left side. And if your brain has been split by the surgery, you still function basically normally. But because the right side of the brain is the one that is looked upon as dealing with the ability to have language, that you can actually be looking at something, and if it flashes on the uh, left side, which is what your right brain sees, I hope I got this right, that you can't actually communicate what you saw. So if you saw the video, it explains it. I might have misquoted, might have misstated there a little bit. But the theory behind this is, we'll talk about it in a minute with when Sam uses this as an evidence that we actually um, talking about the hallucination of the brain, and that we are actually creating the brain creates the illusion of the self. That's what I wanted to get to. So and that's another one that actually was more elaborated in this other video that we had, that I shared with you, about the brain hallucinating your conscious reality. Now, this actually goes a little farther than many atheists that say we do exist, that we're born, and that we die. This one goes actually a little bit further, and it's still part. I consider it still part of the third world, but it's interesting because in my chat room experience on Pal Talk, remember the first night this came up when we were discussing different things, and someone came on there with this whole idea that, you know, who we think we are is actually an illusion of our brain. This goes to the whole idea of the materialistic view that we are strictly bodies and that our brain produces thoughts that give us the illusion that we actually exist. Now, I've said for quite a time, when I talk about the three worlds, if someone says they don't exist, in one sense, that basically, to me, I don't have much. There's not much. How can you discuss with someone um, this whole idea of what life is about and what we're doing if we come to the conclusion that our consciousness is an illusion? Now, Sam doesn't quite go this far. So let me introduce to you, this is Sam Harris. Many of you may know him and may have heard some of his recordings. He's written books. And I want to talk a little bit about him today as in conjunction with the three worlds and using those other videos as some background. And you can look at that, check that out, and see what you think about it. Now, Sam Harris is actually one of the considered one of the four horsemen, and these are some of the most contemporary, famous atheists uh, in our world today. And one of them being Richard Dawkins. He's written the book The God Delusion. Daniel Dennett, which I've heard some of his talks, but not as much. I may get into listening some more of his and talk with him some more. Because as I said, and then also Christopher Hitchens. Now Christopher Hitchens passed away with cancer. I tell you, he was something else. He was very, very, very confrontational and strong with his arguments. But once again, intelligent people. So, if you're interested, and some people aren't, they're satisfied with what they believe and don't really care to hear opposing views. I have found it very interesting over the past years to try to listen to what anybody has to say to just give me a broader perspective of what's going on here in the human dimension. So, um, Sam Harris is one of the four horsemen. Now, a little bit of background on Sam Harris, and I actually got this from Wikipedia. He was born in 1967, um, which makes him around 50, a little over 50 years old, 51, 52, depending on when his birthday is. He's 51 or 52. But he was born in Los Angeles, and he was the son of um, an actor, Berkeley Harris, who had a Quaker background. Um, and then his mom was Susan Harris, and she is stated as having been Jewish and not religious. And I think Sam Harris still claims to be Jewish. Um, but she actually, Sam Harris's mom, she was the creator of the Golden Girls, and she, so she was known in that world. And his parents divorced when he was young, and he, growing up, he wound up attending Stanford University in California. He started as an English major, but then he became interested in philosophy, and this actually came about after he did some experimenting with some drugs, mind altering drugs, LSD and ecstasy. This led him, after his second year at Stanford, which is a very well renowned college, he left and went to India and Nepal, where he lived for over 10 years and studied, and he got into learning about Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, meditation, and he spent many, many years doing that. So, obviously, he is a person that has been serious on a spiritual path and seeking to find the truth. Now, he basically then returned back to Los Angeles and completed his degree in philosophy in the BA in philosophy in year 2000. Then um, he wound up after 9/11. He wound up writing his first book, and his first book was called The End of Faith. And I heard him say in one of his talks that when he wrote that book, he never really proclaimed in the book that he was an atheist, even though he was. Now, talk a little. I want to talk a little bit about atheism. Um, Atheism is basically a school of thought that doesn't believe in a supreme being who intervenes in human in the human dimension. Some atheists could um, be deists who believe in a God that created the world, but then left the world to go on its own. And I don't, there may be different views. Like in any religion, you'll find that, you have different sects and denominations and views on what they believe within that world. So some may believe, uh, in a deistic view and consider the possibility of reincarnation. Some may not. And I think a lot of the, from my understanding, some of the Buddhist tradition cover that range of belief, as well as the Jewish faith. The Jewish faith, to my understanding, um, accepts both atheism and then they have the more conservative traditional views of belief in God that created the world and created us. So, you know, you have to keep that in mind because so often we, as thinking beings, will make a judgment on a religion that may have some things that we actually believe in or a thought system, some things we may agree with and some things we don't. So the thing is with Sam's book on, let me find this here. Give me just a second, please. This was what I wanted to kind of use as our base today for a few minute talk here on waking up. Because Sam Harris gives a guide to spirituality without religion. So, in that sense, he says that we can have spirituality, which to him he defines as discovering the illusion of the self. Now, I know that sounds, to many of us, that would just sound kind of contradictory. How can you claim to be spiritual without claiming to be religious? Well, in his version, I think he would say that it does not include the belief in a supreme being that intervenes in our affairs. The fact, though, that he now is very vocal and he's written a couple of the books and he's done a lot of talks. You can see a lot of things from him on YouTube. If I love YouTube because it allows you to look at what you want when you want, find a subject that you're interested in, um, that you can discover about it. And I've listened to some of his talks, and we'll talk some more about some of those things. Um, but anyways, he is very, very critical, and he can be very critical. But he also says that everybody has worth, and his whole thing is that we need to learn how to um, listen to each other, to try to understand each other, to understand our arguments, but he also reserves the right to be very, very critical of the Christianity and Islam, and particularly Islam, because of the views of their jihad views and uh, their beliefs that they need to attack and kill infidels. And of course, infidels or atheists are not considered popular among many people, but they are actually, I think, somewhat of a growing percentage of the American population. Um, he can be very articulate in his views. And if you don't want to have your faith challenged, I wouldn't recommend you listening to him or Christopher Hitchens. If you're very comfortable and safe and don't want to do any exploring, to not go there. But I wanted to say this was the main point that I just wanted to make briefly today is that when you consider this whole thing of the illusion of the self, that actually goes beyond the belief of many atheists that believe in life and death. So my conversations and my talking through the years in chat rooms, to me, this is a natural result going there of um, of the atheistic view. Because it used to be that the big argument was whether there's a God or not, and you can have a lot of arguments that way, and whether we have a soul or not. Um, but if you admit that we exist, then it's a hard thing dealing with some of the arguments about having to prove that we're going to die. So, and I've argued that quite a bit, and logically, I think I have the strongest argument there is: the fact that we exist, and the fact that we know that there's no such place as nowhere, and therefore, to me, that's a strong, strong basis on faith that we will always be somewhere. So, one way that many atheists can deal with that view is to go to this idea that we don't actually exist. So, because if we exist, they have to deal with these other arguments. That's my opinion. So, he talks about waking up, and like I said, Sam Harris is one of the um, people today that is one of the leading um, promoters of atheism, but he also does it with the view that he believes the world can be a better place without without the beliefs in God and typical religion. So um, that's what I'm going to just stop today and go with that and encourage you to open your mind because, folks, to me, this is going to be the great debate in the future between the three worlds. And of course, I'm strongly proposing that we talk and think about it and respect each other and try to. I really believe that one of the things that's going to be a key factor in us discovering which is true may be science and evolution in the sense that if I were to have a talk with Sam Harris and I were to do like I like to do, to say that you know what, I'll talk with you from that perspective that science is the way to find truth. I would ask the question, and this is it: what is going to happen if at some point in the future science discovers a way to make our bodies permanent? And if we ever have that option to remain permanent in this body that we have, and if genetic engineering ever comes to the point that it would allow us not only to have a permanent body, but maybe even to make our body look exactly like we want it to look, to be at whatever age we want it to be, with whatever features we want it to have. And not only that, we may keep that one for a few hundred years and change it a little bit. We know how popular cosmetic surgery is these days, how we like to change. So if that ever happens, does that suggest that we will then look back on these years of not having that option and wondering where heaven was going to be and what it was going to be like, and then to actually awaken to the uh, fact that we have actually discovered a way to find what we've dreamed about here on planet Earth and begin to move out into the universe. So, with that, I'm going to conclude today. I want to thank you for joining me and hope you have a wonderful day and a good week. And we will look forward to seeing you and talking to you next Sunday and communicating to you through this week.